Hi 9H. This is one of two videos that gives you some examples of sample introductory paragraphs. Now, understand that the first sample I'm going to show you is a sample that is a 2-paragraph intro. Now, a 2-paragraph intro and even a 3 or 4-paragraph or even a chapter intro is possible, but it depends largely it depends on the length of the paper as a whole. Chances of you doing a section, an introductory section, which is 2 or more introductory parts, is really unlikely because your paper is short. But I'm going to start by showing you a 2-paragraph introduction, an introductory section. Okay, so we're going to be working with the thesis, the United States government should never use torture. So here is the first model introductory section. It consists of 2 paragraphs, so be aware that on this screen we have paragraph 1 and I'll show you paragraph 2. But this is all one introduction. I start paragraph 1 by telling a story, and let's listen to the story. The United States is being threatened by a terrorist who has placed a nuclear device in Los Angeles. Jack Bauer, a government agent employed by CTU, that's the counter-terrorist unit, has captured the terrorist, who refuses to tell a very determined Jack Bauer where the nuclear device is hidden. Bauer, in desperation, decides he has to get the location and decides that torture is the only way to get that information to save many lives. Fiercely, he begins the torture and escalates it as the clock ticks because the terrorist will not cooperate. Now, this is just, again, the first paragraph in a section. Again, probably not advisable for you in a short paper. And you notice this is really just a story that introduces the concept that will be behind the thesis. And it tells the story of Jack Bauer, who resorts to torture. Notice that I always use some kind of transition, even in telling the story, because a story flows better. The ideas are presented to the reader's mind much more clearly if there is a flow and if there is transition. So I tell this whole story, and you could see the way it's already leading up to my thesis, but the thesis is not there. Because if we look at the last sentence of this first paragraph of the section, you wouldn't even know what you could prove in terms of he begins the torture. There's nothing here to prove. It's part of the story. So let's go to the second paragraph, which does introduce our thesis. While this seems like a sensible and logical way to deal with the threat of the terrorist, it is not only unethical and immoral, but also an ineffective way to obtain the information. Although our gut reaction to this is to cheer Bauer, it is important to recognize that in reality, the use of even government-sanctioned torture is not an acceptable idea. Because it is a bad idea in so many ways, the United States government should never sanction the use of torture. Now, you can see that I landed on my thesis. I'm ended with my thesis. And again, this is a section. There's 2 paragraphs. So this is the second paragraph. Now, you notice I sort of cover myself. If I look at the last sentence, it says, because it is a bad idea in so many ways. This seemed to imply specific reasons, but I don't want to limit myself at this point. I had 3 reasons that I wanted to cover, but by saying in so many ways, I'm really allowed to, use more than the reasons that seem to be introduced in the introductory section. Some of it is implied as, it's going to lead to a reason, but some of it's not. So we end with our thesis, which is, as you can see by the transition, because it is a bad idea. If We didn't have anything before that to describe the reason it's a bad idea or why the situation in the first paragraph of the section didn't describe something that we should object to, then we couldn't have any kind of transition. Notice at the beginning of the first paragraph, the first sentence of this paragraph, you can see while this seems like a sensible and logical way, what is this? The only way that works is if there's a paragraph before it and we know what the word this refers to. It's transition. This, in the new paragraph, in the first sentence, tells us that there was something discussed that this is referring to. And the only place it can be is in the previous paragraph. Please understand, transition appears in a sentence that refers back to the last sentence. It's not before. It's never before. In other words, here's the sentence, and I'm going to somehow isolate it and not relate it to what came before it. You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't bring up a new idea in the middle of nowhere, basically. So if you look at this, there's a lot of transition used, and that's what makes it work. But in the end, even in a 2-paragraph section, an introductory section, the thesis comes at the end of the introduction. And in this case, the thesis comes at the end of the second paragraph because the introduction is 2 paragraphs. Thanks for listening, and I'll continue soon.